Hope wanted to know what government was doing to create jobs, especially in the former homelands, to counter the migrant labour system which adversely affects people in these former homelands.
Honourable Deputy President, having been exposed to the situation of the migrant labour system yourself, with the experience that we have, and I'm sure that you are as sensitive as we are on this matter. And therefore, I want to raise the issue of the infrastructure which is lying fallow in the homelands, the former homelands, where these people are coming from, the areas that have been declared in the past as cheap labor reserves. You have areas like, and in the former Transkei, former Ciskei, former Bophuthatswana, that infrastructure is lying fallow. And yet we have a number of people that are moving from those areas to go and work in the mines. This is an issue that we kept on raising within our own and portfolio committees, but there has never been any respectable follow-up on it. And the question of the incentives is also linked to this, so that people don't move from those areas. They remain where they reside with their families, because, as you rightly pointed out, it breaks down families. It's a serious issue, especially with regard to children and women. I thank you. I would like the Deputy President
your
to give
time
us
has
an
expired,
idea on
Honourable
this.
Member.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed, that is the reason why a Ministry of Rural Development was established, was precisely to, among other functions, to ensure that there is development taking place in rural areas. And to the extent that there is infrastructure that is lying fallow, no doubt that is something that the Minister of Rural Development, as well as, of course, the PICC, could look at those structures and ensure that they are renovated to levels where they can serve as some kind of catalysts for developing the local economies, because the development patterns of South Africa followed three nodal points: the reef in Gauteng, Cape Town here in Western Cape and the Vinelands, and Durban in Natal. The rest of the country remained underdeveloped. And so that's part of the reason why the PICC has identified the strategic infrastructure projects to try and spread nodal points for development beyond the three that today serve as catchment areas. Even the census, the recent census, confirm in terms of movements of people and from one province to the other. We see that they are moving into the provinces where there is development. Thank you.
Another supplementary question relating to the living conditions of mine workers at Marikana came from Mr. Seja Motopo Motau of the Democratic Alliance.
Honourable Deputy President, there's something that's compounded the situation that you've clarified now. In an effort to lend flexibility and freedom of choice to their employees, some of the mining houses are now paying their workers a monthly sleep-out allowance if they choose to stay out of the single-sex hostels, which is, it appears on the face of it to be a very good thing and a reasonable thing to do. However, what seems now to be happening is that some of the miners establish secondary homes in the mushrooming informal settlements around Marikana and other mines to the detriment of their families in the rural areas. Clearly, this is an undesirable, unintended consequence of a good policy decision. Honourable Deputy President, how is this phenomenon being factored into the anti-poverty campaign to ensure that the rural families are not further impoverished?
Well, this living out allowance is something that was negotiated, I suppose, by the workers themselves through their unions. The reality is that it appears appealing to ordinary workers because 1,800 appears quite a lot of money, but the reality is that this is precisely what drives these members into informal settlements. And this is, in a sense, a perverse argument in the sense that the compounds, the single-sex compounds, are not desirable themselves. In fact, we would argue that the mining companies should provide proper single quarters and apartments for their workforce, and not just these Spartan single-sex compounds. And yet, relatively speaking, these single-sex compounds are better than the informal settlements. So, in a sense, therein lies the perversity of this issue of living out allowance. And what we're saying is, if the mining houses could, rather than providing this or giving workers living out allowances, if they could provide them with decent, safe transport to go home, and so they go to their real homes, that would address most of these challenges which arise from the informal, poorly serviced informal settlements, and of course, as you say, the consequence of establishing secondary homes would also be addressed in the process. Thank you.
Advocate Mike Masuta of the ANC had a different take on the same question to the Deputy President.
I'd like to thank the Deputy President for so aptly outlining the ANC government's approach to internal economic migration by highlighting the various interventions that are aimed at promoting the migration by choice rather than necessity. In other words, the pull factors rather than push factors that drive migration. But through you, Deputy President, what is, through you, Speaker, Deputy President, I'd like to know what is your response to the DA's own approach, which in sharp contrast, as highlighted by its leader, the Honorable Premier Zille, views fellow citizens who migrate from other provinces to the Western Cape as refugees, and in a particular tweet that she posted a few months ago, referred to schools that were built specifically for education, to education refugees. What is your response to a fellow citizen referring to other citizens as refugees and thus insulting their dignity?
The Honourable Deputy President.
Well, I think it is ill-advised to refer to any fellow South African citizens as refugees in the Republic of South Africa. I think all should be referred to as fellow citizens or compatriots, better still. Yeah. Thank you.
It's time for a break. When we return, we'll look at member statements in the National Assembly. Stay tuned.